massage too, guys.
Well, massage, somebody's name to get massage.
Not a massage here, but you can have it.
Call to order. Welcome everybody. Grand Forks City Council meeting Monday, September 21st, 2020, 5:30 p.m. Roll call, please.
Weigel.
Here.
Doppler. Here. Weber.
Here.
Mock. Here. Kavami. Here. Veen.
Here.
And Sandy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. 1.2, Mayor's announcements. We do have a few announcements today. I'm going to start off with sending our prayers and best wishes out to all the firefighters that are out west fighting those forest fires, but especially the 4 that we sent out there. They've been doing a lot of different things, ranging from prep work near the Caves National Monument, debris pickup, using the fire engines to test sprinkler systems and checking for hot spots. I did get reports back that they are sleeping in tents out there in a rural Oregon just south of Selma. So it's been a challenging environment. They've been eating right in camp, but they were doing a good job. We appreciate all their sacrifices and pray for their continued safety as they continue to protect property. With firefighters statewide from Williston, Fargo, and Minot have all sent teams out there. So a big thanks and prayers to those guys. Since we're on the thank you train, let's go to our street sanitation and waterworks crews for their fall cleanup last week. I think they did a phenomenal job. They even got a few police officers to chip in to help out. Over 500 tons of garbage was picked up, and another 70 tons were hauled to the landfill, which was about 3/4 of our normal spring cleanup, so it was about what was expected. I was able to get out to Public Works last week, just before that started, and sent them our wishes. We've got a lot of hardworking and dedicated group out there. We will have leaf pickup is still planned for October, but I think we're going to have to wait till we have some leaves on the ground. We're having a pretty good fall so far. On another announcement, the Grand Forks Growth Fund just launched the COVID-19 Response Unmet Needs Revolving Loan Fund. So it's short with C-Run. I think we were going to try to put that up. I don't know if we got that. It'll be attached. They make federal CARES Act dollars available in low-interest working capital loans for local small businesses and nonprofits. We continue to support small businesses during this difficult time. Please contact our staff in community development if you have any questions on how to apply. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Moving on, I wanted to give a thank you to John Ocken out there at True North Equipment. We took a tour out there last week at the old Wells Concrete facility, as well as got to meet a lot of the leadership over at Coast Concrete, and that was great. Nice to see their hardworking team, learn a little bit about their business. We got a busy couple weeks. I visited the library today. They're doing a lot of good things over there, trying to find a path to get some sort of hybrid opening. At some point, I know they're planning a special board meeting coming up at the end of the month, so we'll hopefully have a plan coming out of there. I think a lot of people are excited. Today we're out doing the recording for the Nistler groundbreaking, which was ended up being a pretty dusty, windy, dirty day, so I got pretty well full of dirt by the end of that, but we got it done. On Wednesday we got the Alaris Center Commission meeting, and we're going to have a press conference on the Alaris naming rights, so that deal was, I believe, sealed as well, so we're pretty excited about that. I'll be out at the Grand Forks Clinic for another groundbreaking on Wednesday down on South Washington. And we got another ribbon cutting for Mobile Recon out there on Ryland Road. So there's a lot happening. It's pretty exciting. Wake Up UND is going to be next Tuesday as well, so I'll be on with President Armacost. And the Governor Bergen is going to be in town for the Demers Avenue ribbon cutting. That'll be next Thursday. So there's a lot to be excited and optimistic about in Grand Forks. And lastly, I want to take a moment here to recognize a longtime community member, leader, and volunteer, Mr. Gerald Joyce. Jerry, they call him. Mr. Joyce would be considered a career volunteer to most, a World War II veteran. He joined the U.S. Army in 1943 at the age of 19. In 1972, he moved to Grand Forks to be the manager at the J.C. Penney store, where he retired in 1984. Using his experiences while managing Penney's, Jerry became a member of the Service Corps of Retired Executives, also known as SCORE. As a SCORE mentor and leader, Mr. Joyce mentored countless entrepreneurs who wanted to start and expand their business. In addition to his work for SCORE, Jerry's been active member of the Kiwanis Club for 65 years, and he was an instrumental player in developing Kiwanis Park. He also served as a Grand Forks City Council member from 1984 to 1988, so 4 years of that must have been enough for him. Most importantly, Jerry's been married to his wife, Mary, for 68 years, and they've got 6 kids, 16 grandkids, and 9 great-grandkids. So at the age of 96, and after 36 years of volunteering and mentoring at SCORE, Mr. Joyce announced that he will be stepping down from his duties on September 30th. On behalf of the entire Grand Forks community, I want to thank Jerry for his service to our country and community, his selfless volunteerism, and his mentoring of the next generation of entrepreneurs and business leaders. What an incredible life, well lived, and ongoing with a legacy that will last generations. So, big shout out to him. What a great guy. From there, let's move on to 2.
2.1 is COVID-19 dashboard update.
I'll do just a quick COVID update, then we'll move it over to, I think Mr. Dulitz has it. But last Tuesday, we rescinded the order closing liquor license holders at 11 p.m. The original order was measured and targeted, and it was intended to be temporary. With our case numbers and positivity rate on a steady decline, I felt it was time to lift that order. Our Safe September public information campaign is going well, so thank you to our public information staff and the institutional partners for the work done on that. UND's in their 5th week, and the Grand Forks public schools are in their 4th week. We saw a spike in numbers, and those numbers are starting to come down. We haven't overrun our hospital system, and we've been yet to go above single digits. I think we currently are around 6 hospitalizations, but that's a county number, and the addresses aren't given, so we don't know necessarily which county those are from, but that's the number that's in Altru right now. I want to give a shout out to the public schools for keeping those kids in school. It's been great. And I know we've become kind of a role model for other towns and our other school districts in our region on how to operate in-person learning, so that's pretty exciting. Leading up to the next item, the importance of keeping our kids in school and what that means to the economy is one of the main reasons we are proposing to partner with the school district and support them with some funding. From now, let's move to you, Mr. Dulitz.
Mayor Boczynski, members of the council, I'm Michael Dulitz. I'm temporarily filling in as the COVID-19 data analyst for Grand Forks Public Health. I'm going to give you a quick update on the health officer's dashboard as well as some additional measures that did get uploaded to your agenda as well, so you can follow along the slides there. Taking a look at our health officer risk score as what went out today. Our overall score right now is at a 1.9, which puts us in the orange or high-risk category. That is up from yesterday where we were at 1.8, and that is because we had an increase in 1.7, because we had an increase in the percent change for our number of new COVID-19 cases in Grand Forks County, so that went up to 21.2%, or that's 21.2% increase compared to the week before. You can think of the percent change like the slope of the line of the new cases. So if that number is going up, the slope of the line of new cases is going to also go up as well. Looking at our trends, the number of new COVID-19 cases, we were on a really good downward trend. Last week I was fairly confident that we'd be going down into the orange category. Unfortunately, we have had a small increase in the number of new cases, and so now we're running right around the 30 cases per 100,000 per day. Looking at testing, we have had a slight decrease in our testing numbers, but we still remain very strong there. Our percent positivity has also had a small increase. You may have seen on the dashboard, I put it at 3.998. When I plugged it into my spreadsheet, we are still just a hair below 4%. If we go up to 4%, then we would be in the orange for that category. I'm a little bit concerned about the increase in the numbers, or that the number is kind of bent in the other direction. But it is something to keep an eye on. Percent change has also been going up as well, again, thinking that as like the slope of the new case line. Looking at the overall dashboard score, we were on a downward trend for quite a while, and unfortunately that trend has been reversing up into our current score of 1.9. And our percent change for this score is still remaining relatively flat because it is kind of staying in that 1.6 to 1.9 range. Looking at comparison to other communities using the dashboard score methodology while holding all of our hospital system scores to 0 because I don't have the same data for other hospital systems as I do for Altru. This is Grand Forks. And then this is Cass as a comparison. They've had a increase over the past week, and then comparing North Dakota as well. We are above the North Dakota kind of simulated score. Looking at comparing Grand Forks to Burley, Morton, and Ward counties, Burley Morton has been in the orange for a sustained period of time, looking back almost to July, and have not seen those numbers decrease except for a couple temporary reprieves. And Ward has been on an upward trend as of late. So, if we look at all the four, the four large communities as well as the state, we are actually below everybody else score-wise. Comparing our rates to other communities, so our case rate, we had that big spike where we were up to almost 100 cases per 100,000, but that has kind of gone down to fit, better within what we've been seeing in other communities. Cass County has surpassed us as well. Burley County continues to be on an upward trend, and their upward trend has been very sustained and kind of very long. They've had a lot of very high case days as well. And then Ward County, which traditionally had been much lower than the other large communities in the state, has been on kind of an upward trend as well. And then North Dakota as well, so kind of getting a look at the entire state. One area that I did want to make sure that I highlighted, I did have to go through a approval process from the state, but I made sure that that we could share this information. Is I was comparing the age groups. We were noticing a lot of increases in the 60-plus age group, which is population of concern that we really do want to protect, both the 60-plus age group as well as our school age group. When we look at our school age group, we're doing a really good job at keeping the case counts low in that 0 to 14 age range, and that's what's helping us keep our schools open. When we look at our 15 to 24 age range, I did kind of cut this off so we didn't have to, because we had kind of that outlier number of cases, but that number is still on a decline. And this is looking at cases per 10,000. So if you're thinking in the 100,000, just you drop a zero off. Looking at the 24 to 59 age group, we've been seeing a slight increase in that age group compared to others. So looking at this would be a lot of the individuals who are out of college in the working age group. So individuals who we don't really want to be outside of work, but we have been seeing increases in that age group. And then finally, looking at the 60-plus age group, I know I have a lot of lines on there, but that is the purple line on there. The 60-plus age group, as of today, or as of yesterday, is now at the same level as the 15 to 24 age group. So we want to make sure that we are also considering the 60-plus age group and applying what we've done to keep the 0 to 14 age group, in school, doing what they need to do. We want to apply that to the 60-plus age group as well, since they are another one of our vulnerable populations. A majority of those individuals in that 60-plus age group are in the age range of about 60 to roughly 60 to 70, maybe 75. There haven't been as many in the advanced age, so a lot, kind of clustered around 65. And then finally, looking at Grand Forks as a whole, so the 60-plus age group is above the Grand Forks County average as a whole, as well as that 15 to 24 age group. Again, looking at our case counts, so our active cases are starting to take a small bend up. Over the past few days, we have had a couple of large testing event days, but we still are seeing a little bit of an increase in the number of active cases. Looking at the governor's risk level, so the governor's risk level, when we look at 14 days, that moves the dial a lot slower. So we actually did move down from the red into the orange on the 14-day average active cases per day. So we're now at 36.5, which is in the orange category where we were in red last week. So when we look at the curve for that, that's a lot smoother of a curve because people are staying in that count for a very long time and kind of fall off very slowly. When we average out active cases, which are on for 10 days, as well as when we average that over a total of 14 days as well. When we look at the governor's dashboard, we did finally get clarification on the methodology for their average daily tests, and they are using average daily tests per 10,000 population, which puts us at an 87, which is very solidly in that blue area. And then our percent positivity has had a slight increase. Again, when we look over 14 days, that smooths things out a lot more, makes it a little bit slower to change to changing community conditions, so that makes it a little bit tougher. But if you're the governor and you have a lot of small population areas and rural areas, that is something that is needed. Comparing the governor's risk level, I just wanted to highlight a couple of areas, to highlight where Grand Forks is at in the grand scheme of things with testing. The bottom graph shows Grand Forks compared to the 4 large communities, and I left my my font kind of small. So we have the top, which is Grand Forks in black. We've remained, pretty much a leader for much of July, August, and into September. The next color down is Burley Morton. They've had that sustained increase in the number of cases, so it makes sense that we'd be targeting testing in that area. Ward County and Cass County have been much lower than Grand Forks as well, to the point that Ward County was even dipping down into the green. So we are doing a good job on the testing side when we compare Grand Forks to other communities as well. With that, I'm open to any questions. I did attach a few additional slides to what I uploaded, so if you do have questions about any other measures, you might be able to find those there.
All right, questions for Mr. Dulitz? Mr. Weber?
Sure. Slide number 2, where you show the meter, and it indicates that the trend is down, although you mentioned that our numbers have actually gone up the last couple days. That overall trend score, the arrow, how do you determine whether that goes up or down?
So the overall trend score is a comparison of the average over the past week compared to the average of the week before.
Very good.
So if we compare that, we're still kind of in the same spot, and actually the graph that kind of demonstrates that is the bottom graph on this slide.
Rather than it going back and forth on a daily basis, you use the average.
Yeah, so that one is kind of a slower moving metric, and that's, it isn't something that's factored into the score. It's just kind of showing an overall trend to give you an idea on if we're, if that score is on an upward trend, downward trend, et cetera.
Very good. You indicated some of the differences between using a 7-day, as our local public health officer does, and the 14-day average that the governor does. That causes some changes in the graphs. Why did and I don't know if you know this right off the top of your head, can you discuss why the local public health officer chose a 7-day average rather than a 14-day average?
The emphasis on the 7-day average by the public health officer, Dr. Walls, was based off of the national, looking at national metrics. A lot of those are based off of a 7-day average. So when putting together the dashboard, the emphasis was placed on using national metrics to make sure that we had a good kind of point of comparison to other localities throughout the nation. And so we did use those metrics from the White House Coronavirus Task Force, as well as the Harvard Global Health Institute. We use those metrics because it did make sense for our comparison purposes.
Used by the White House Coronavirus Task Force and the Harvard.
Correct.
Yes, thanks. Also, while we have a downward trend, many of the key indicators continue to be in the orange or the red level, which should be concerning, but we seem to be trending in the right direction. Low hospitalizations, lots of testing. Not only is the state leading in testing, thank you, Governor Burgum, but also I'm guessing because of our public health officer, President Armacost, Mayor Bachensky, we're very fortunate to have, and Debbie Swanson, yourself, we have fantastic high rates of testing. So thank you for that. One of the things that I've been mentioning, and I think it shows up on slide 9, is the concern that since Labor Day and now since Rush Week last week with the Greek Society on campus, we want to watch for any concerning trends with those older age groups, and we are seeing that. It's I don't know if it's a minor trend or not. Are those numbers that we should be concerned about, or is this just an anomaly of a minor increase?
I think it is something to use with caution, or to follow with caution. It is looking retrospectively, it's a lot easier to say, well, we're at a peak at this point. We don't know what the future will hold, and when I try and make predictions with the data, sometimes I end up coming back to you a week later saying, well, I thought this is where we were going, but not quite. So, if individuals are watching this meeting and wondering if maybe it's an opportunity to take some more personal steps, that might be a good way to think about it. Mayor Bochensky has mentioned many times that one of the populations that he follows very closely is 60, the individuals who are 60 plus. So we want to make sure to do everything we can as a community to, make sure that individuals, in that age group are not seeing, increased spread or anything like that. So
I share that concern, both because this group is more vulnerable to health issues or to death. We have now had over 200 North Dakotans die since the beginning of this. We've had many North Dakotans die, but 200 specific to COVID, and it's hard to always pinpoint the cause of death, but 200 death certificates related to COVID. Also, not to be too mercenary about it, but this is the age group that really drives much of our economy. We want them feeling safe and out there helping the economy along. That's all the questions I have for you. Mr. Mayor, if you'd mention, I saw your commercial on social media, looking good there, except for the one picture where it's not looking quite so good. Are there any updates on the public education campaign?
Well, I think it's been rolling out. We still have more videos that are coming. There's been some people that have reached out looking at other avenues where we could send that message out. But I think it's successful, and we need to keep pushing it.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mike.
Do we have any other comments, Mr. Veen?
Yeah. Mr. Dulitz, can you go to the slide that had the number of tests? So could you just, when we talk about the number of tests, Grand Forks County, we are at how many are we averaging?
So I'm using the, here I'm using the governor's average. So the population of Grand Forks County is about 70,000 individuals, and so we had 87 for today. So we were averaging 87 tests per 10,000. So if you multiply 87 by 7, that would give you the rough estimation of how many tests we have per day.
So 87 tests per 10,000.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. How often do we have testing?
Right now we're having testing events on Tuesdays, and then we've been planning for every other Saturday at UND as well, and then we've had some sporadically placed in between there. So we do see days where we have a number of testing, we have a number of tests because the state's working through a testing event or something like that. Then we see days that are lower, but Altria has been a very good partner as far as helping fill in with testing in between there. So for individuals who are either close contacts or symptomatic, they're very good about getting them tested as well.
Yeah. So if somebody is concerned, for instance, that they may have been in contact, they can call. How would they go about getting a test?
So they call the Altru COVID hotline, and the Altru COVID hotline would assess the individual, either determine if they're a close contact of a positive case, which then they want them to get tested at 7 to 10 days after that contact, or if they're having symptoms, they want them to get tested right away. If there's circumstances beyond that, where they weren't a close contact, they aren't having symptoms, but maybe they were at an event where there was a positive person, but they weren't named a close contact or something like that, Altru does have discretion to also test those individuals as well, and that's partially supported by the Public Health Department.
So I think we're aware testing is a really important piece of this whole process. If we were to, are there avenues for us to increase the availability of testing on a mass basis for anybody who would like to?
There are opportunities as well, or to increase testing. We're obviously fitting within, kind of the the entire state's capacity, because a lot of our tests, upwards of 90+% of our tests are completed either by the North Dakota Department of Health or a contract lab that they use to help bolster their testing ability. So we kind of fit within the allocation of tests from there as well. But with a request, we could probably increase that testing capacity.
So are you hearing anybody complaining that we don't have enough opportunity for tests?
I have not personally heard that. I could defer to Debbie as well if you would rather hear from her in that respect.
I just, like I said, I just think it's such a critical part of the whole process. It's nice that I think if people have a concern, because there's enough pressure on people already, that we would somehow make available more testing, even though we're doing well. I mean, as you look at comparison, we're doing well, but I just wondered what that potential would be to up the testing potential if we wanted to do that, and how that might look.
And we have looked at, or we have done testing with targeted groups before, so we'll do surveillance testing in various locations in the community, such as we've done surveillance testing events at the Mission, for instance. So there are opportunities for us to request those testing events and have it kind of worked into that matrix as well.
Okay, thank you.
And Mayor Buchansky,
Yep.
I think I've heard this from our Public Health Director, Debbie Swanson, is that at these we're calling them UND events, but it's generally plus or minus 50% UND related and 50% public, and so we are providing a lot of public access for people that are showing up through this month. And obviously Altru is there for the day-to-day, hour-to-hour testing, and so I think I think Spectra is also doing some testing
Yes.
too. And so I think the governor's all in on testing, and he wants to, I think some days we even got above 10,000 tests in a
This
day.
week we had over 10,000 tests.
Moving forward. And there was some discussion about getting some research, and we've said this for the last 3 months, but getting testing availability at UND, at the med school, and it seems like that's moving forward in a positive way, and it just takes supplies and all those sorts of things. So I think we're going the right direction. The governor wants to be there. Obviously, he's very proud because that's what he talks about every time he's briefing, that we are leading the nation on that. And so I think we're satisfying that well. The other thing that Ms. Swanson has talked about is since they're becoming 50-50, and as you know, we're supplementing these events with firefighters that are working off duty. And that's part of when we're talking about our CARES funding with the overtime, we're paying them overtime to do those. And just because they're out in Oregon, they're willing to help support. It's one thing to say you're going to have a testing event. The other thing is to staff the testing event. And I think the concern is as we move forward, if these become more and more public driven, UND may ask for additional support, and we'll do that. But people got to show up to help support the events and not just have events. So we've got to do that, whether it's testing for public schools or whatever else. Everybody wants to show up, but someone's got to staff these events and make them happen. And thankfully, health department's done that. We've supplemented with our own city employees. And UND, really hats off to UND. They've supported those events very well, and I'm very proud of what they've done too.
Any other questions for Mr. Dulitz? I think I would just say one thing. I think, if you look at just the staggering numbers of tests, I mean, public health, either directly or in conjunction with others, is probably going to be running up against maybe 100,000 tests by the time this is done. I think that's just amazing. Also going to be highly involved in the vaccine rollout. And I think, just looking at hiring and how quickly staffing resources were ramped up, I think it's really done an amazing job. And we've gotten credit not only statewide, but nationally. So thank you guys on behalf of the whole city.
Thank you.
I think with that, we'll move on to 3 public hearings and second readings of ordinances. Seeing that there are none, I think we can move on to 4 action items. I know we're going to pull 4.1. Was there any on between 4.6 and 4.11 from planning that you wanted pulled, Mr. Bean?
4, 7, 9, and 11.
7, 4.9. Okay, then on the consent agenda, we're looking for a motion on 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, 4.6, 4.8, 4.10. Do we have a motion? Motion from Councilmember Kwame, second from Mr. Weber. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Those motions carry. Moving on, 4.1.
4.1 is the COVID-19 CARES funding allocation approval and related attachments.
Mr. Phelan.
Mayor Potensky, I'm going to lead out the presentation. I also have Maureen here and also Meredith, so we'll team up on this presentation. Just want to give you some updates. What we're asking for this evening is that you would, in bold, final approve this, subject to the city attorney's final review and approval to include a potential agreement with the Grand Forks Public Schools. So that's what we're asking for. That's an addition on to what we talked about last week. Also, I want to update that the Grand Forks County Commission did approve funding for, we'll call it rural schools in Grand Forks County. They did approve the $270,000 to $300,000 for that school-related nursing and other things to support the public health of schools. That was approved last Tuesday out of their CARES funding allotment. The other thing that came up, I shared on the staff report, is that our state of North Dakota, we did run out of the appropriation. So, when we did, it was going to be sworn officers for both cities and counties. They did an estimate on setting aside enough funds to carry us through these first several months. So we had 2 months remaining, August and September, for our sworn. Well, the previous months, we've already burned through all the money. And so obviously there was a miscalculation on the number of sworn officers and the amount of pay and benefits. So what that's going to require is they're going to have to go back to ask the Legislative Emergency Committee to appropriate more money so that we get the final 2 months of the appropriation moving forward. So that's unknown, but our league, along with all the cities, will be really pushing for that we do get the last 2 months appropriated. As you recall, that was on the low end, we were pondering about $1.7 million in additional money, maybe on the upper end about $2 million, but again, that would have to be fully appropriated to get our share. So just want to let you know on that. Hopefully we'll hear by October that the state had enough funds so that we did get the final 2 months of allotment, but that's a question mark right now. On the positive side, I think on the same day, Meredith sent an email, and I think a lot of the monies that we get from Meredith really go to her and how well we've run the program, that we keep getting additional CDBG funds just because I think we're a community that's looked up to and how we do things, and really a large thanks to Meredith. But we're anticipating receiving almost $300,000 in additional money related to COVID, and some of it because the federal government thinks we have needs here to help support COVID related responses on that. So I wanted to highlight that moving forward. Would Meredith, and I'll have her come up and talk, she would prefer the council would allocate this funds in a way that we could quickly get it out the door without having to go through a lengthy process like we normally do with CDBG. If there's some way that we could really respond and react quickly due to COVID and get the funding out to appropriate entities, like whether it's the Grand Forks Public Schools or whether it's Grand Forks Public Health, something where we can move the money out faster, that would be her request. I'll have her put her some more words than I can say on that. The other thing that came up was related to Grand Forks Public Schools, and Council Vice President Mock and I had conversations regarding there is going to be an additional appropriation to schools across our state, and that was approved, I believe, last week. Moving forward. So I didn't get a chance to talk to Dr. Brenner before the meeting. I tried to reach out, but if you recall, one of the attachments to
the staff report is a spreadsheet that was created by Scott Berge, who's the business manager for the school district. And importantly, we were looking at kind of what their priority needs were, and what we landed on were these staffing the isolation rooms that totaled up to be $475,000. That's the dollar amount we've been really focused on with the Grand Forks Public Schools. The important note is the asterisk down below, because there was even an article about what schools are going to get. Mr. Berge did make a point that it's going to be reimbursable related. He anticipated they would be eligible, if you look at the footnote, up to $1.425 million, but he anticipated that they would ultimately get reimbursed $700,000 to $800,000 of that is what he anticipated. And so some of the discussion is with the additional appropriation to the school district and what we were proposing here in this initial allocation of the $221,000 plus maybe an additional allocation if we do get additional CARES funding, would the school district be taken care of without the appropriation that we would, pass on to the school district? My math says that right now they're at a deficit of 1.7 million. I took the upper estimate of 800,000 that they would receive from the additional CARES allotment from a reimbursable perspective. I added in the 475, which would be that upper limit, assuming we get a second allotment to that fund, or we supplement with CDBG or something like that, is that with that, they'd still be almost $500,000 in deficit with COVID-related expenses, if that transpires the way it is. So I just want to let everyone know, based upon Mr. Berge's kind of estimate, that if we do deliver them $221,000 out of this initial allotment, it looks like they're still going to be in a deficit situation at this point in time. Also, Mr. Weigel, or Councilmember Weigel, had a really good discussion on private schools. We do have two private schools, I think St. Mike's and Holy Family. Thanks to Councilmember Dockley, she provided me some information too. And I did have a follow-up conversation with Scott Berge, the business manager of the school district. And his email is attached to it. They did receive CARES funding under some initial allotment, 2.1. They were allowed to, under a formula basis, they used a per pupil basis, they were able to allocate funds to private schools as a kind of a authorized educational entity, local, and they did distribute that on a per capita basis. I did follow up, Mr. Gosta did have was able to provide a preliminary review, and he kind of came to the same conclusion that you can do it, but it has to be done through a qualified local educational unit, has to do that like the Grand Forks Public Schools as we move forward. So that's what we've done in the meantime. What we'd ask for tonight is
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? We can do it, but we would have to.
we would have to, you'd have to, right now our reading is, we'd have to give it to the Grand Forks Public Schools, who would then have to determine an appropriate allocation to the private schools. And similar to what they received in their CARES funding, they received CARES funds, and it can be delivered, but it cannot be delivered by the city of Grand Forks, per se. And it has to be for qualified educational expenses, similar to what we're doing with our Grand Forks Public Schools. And it seems like what the order of the Secretary of Education, DeVos, is that public educational institutions can deliver money for primary educational purposes, but they should be the entities that do that moving forward. What we're asking for this evening is that we would again approve the final allocation that we've noted here in the staff report, that we would make that subject to final review and approval from our city attorney to include a final agreement with the Grand Forks Public Schools. Further, because of the unknown nature of our second allocation of CARES funding, that we would take a further look at that allocation of that $300,000 I spoke of, that Meredith informed us that we were receiving. We would take a look at that as a way to appropriate that money as quickly as possible to entities like the Grand Forks Public Schools, Public Health, and others in an expedited fashion, and probably bring that back to the next committee of the whole meeting for further discussion. but that we wouldn't, guarantee anything else is coming at this point in time. I was talking with Councilmember Vice President Mock before this. I think if Grand Forks Public Schools suddenly gets much more than they anticipate of that 800,000 and suddenly they're made whole in some way or fashion, I think as part of our final agreement with the school district, they'll give us some time to, if that happens, we can come back to the city council to say, they got many funds than they anticipated under their initial allocation. So that's why we're kind of doing what we're doing. I know some of this stuff is in advance, we're not quite sure, but I think as things kind of wind down here in October, we'll know more. And it would at least keep things moving. And if things turn out a little bit different, kind of like we were here last Monday, we got more news, some bad news, some good news. We could always come back to the city council, but this would keep it going moving forward, Mayor Buczynski. So with that, I'd stand for any questions. Maureen is here also, and Meredith is here for any discussion on the CDBG funds.
I think it's important to get the money ready and available when it's needed, especially at a time like this. Mr. Weigel? Is that your comment? No. Okay.
Okay. Mr. Phelan, if I were to make a motion and ask this be approved, could I make that motion contingent upon them following the same process that they followed when they originally received their federal CARES funding? So based on the same formula, that's a good word. Same formula that they already got. And is that something we could do?
Make it subject to final review and approval of our city attorney. I think that'd be appropriate.
Perfect.
Any other questions or comments? Did you want to go to Meredith first? Go ahead. Well, let's finish this part, then we'll go to Meredith. She's got kind of a separate topic, right? So go ahead, Council Vice President.
I guess I'm struggling a little bit because I do believe, just as of last week, they approved OMB. I'm not sure who approved it from the state level, but they approved COVID grants to go to K-12. And so I guess my concern is that we really don't fund the public school system. And so I'm concerned a little bit, not that they don't have needs, but that we would start doing Band-Aid funding with our allocations, and then if there's uncertainty about the last few months of our allocations, just how much we're confusing the point. Because if they are having shortfalls, those are very important that we fill those shortfalls and that we identify those, but we're not typically the funding entity for the public schools, so that's kind of my concern. I'm also a little bit concerned because I think there was reimbursement opportunity for staffing costs through those funds, and so part of my concern would be that if our dollars are going in for staffing costs, then that might not be even the greatest need that the schools would have or that we would have at the city level. So I'm just wondering if it would be more prudent to hold that until we know what our needs are or what their gap is, and let them figure out what grant dollars are actually available and how much they're being reimbursed for, and where their shortfalls are, I guess.
Mr. Phelan?
Mayor Buczynski and Vice President Mock. I would say, I agree with you. I think there's going to be more light shown on this issue, but if I could, I would just request, and this is no sword I would fall on right now, but is that if we allocate the 221 in there, and if the reimbursement comes back differently, then we can bring that back. So make it contingent on provide them the funding, subject to an agreement, and also subject to, what they kind of spelled out as part, what their reimbursement is in a similar fashion. If that turns out differently, we won't move forward with the cooperative agreement with them, and we'll come back to say, what, great news, they got more money than they ever anticipated, and it's good news that we've been able, and I think we're sharing the resources, and we're not giving the money. I think we're investing in the schools to keep them going, It's really COVID-related activities that we're investing in. And what we discovered is that, as the mayor said, after 4 weeks, we're still in school session. We should be really commendable to our school district that they've been in session for grade schools, which I think is unique. And that's provided a lot of workforce and a lot of less stress in families, and this is really encouraging them to do that. So we're just kind of sharing as local governments. But if the funding comes in higher, I think we would come back to you at the next city council meeting to give you an update, which would be 2 weeks from now. I think we'll have more clarity at that point.
So would we do that, would we approve it and have them go through those reimbursement funds first before we see this, so that we can better identify
Yeah.
what those gaps are? Or, you know, if there's something we can do, say with like busing to coordinate costs or help with efficiencies of city services or something of that nature.
Mr. Phelan, I guess my question would be too along the same lines. I guess if they're receiving the money from the city, that doesn't put any risk to reimbursement money on staffing. I know they've sort of identified the staffing as their biggest need right now, which is why the money was put there, but us putting that there doesn't risk a lower amount coming as a reimbursement later.
No, it doesn't. So I think we're trying to demonstrate, they're doing some things in their school district and we're not doing to have to support, similar to what the county is doing with the schools. But I think even if you wanted to add on to the motion of make it subject to us coming back with a final appropriation from the school district, so you can look at this spreadsheet here with what they anticipate receiving or what they will be receiving within 2 weeks too. It'll take us a couple weeks to put an agreement together anyway, and we can report back.
I mean, my main concern is just, it's very likely that the schools will have a great deal of needs now and going forward, and I don't think we can make up every gap that they have. So I just want to make sure that we're protecting our citizens and our priorities. We're not doing something or investing in something that we could do with that money. Not because they don't need it, but we're not typically the funding agency, so that's.
And I think Mayor Buczynski, I think with this new news with, we don't know, all of a sudden some of this funding pops up suddenly. So not that we're not going to take the money, but there's always this uncertainty and all of a sudden something happens and we're not. So I think right now with the uncertainty, I think we've improved this allocation. We got some additional work and we'll report back in 2 weeks. And I think we have taken care of our priorities first, like we should. We're taking care of all the reimbursements that we've already expended. We've set aside some money for additional overtime and those sorts of things. We're covering our public health department expenses into 21. And then we've taken care of a lot of capital, general fund capital that we were not able to fund, and to include a interoperable radio network system. So I think we have taken care of needs that we didn't anticipate we'd be able to cover due to our revenue shortfalls in the general fund. So I think we have taken care of a lot of ourselves, and really the increment we're looking at bringing to the school district is a small portion of a greater whole.
Mr. Sack.
Mr. Phelan, appreciate it. I like Ms. Mock's line of thought of making sure that we're taking care of our finances. At the same time, I understand that for me, this is an economic development issue. We've got to figure out a way how to keep the kids in schools. I do wonder, though, how Grand Forks Public School District compares to other school districts within the state. Are we an anomaly? Is it the public schools? Are they in this situation because of something that happened locally? Or is this a function of every school district in the state is having the same problem? I know that that's a rhetorical question. I'd love to, if the public school knew the answer to that, and the answer was every school district in the state is way down, we should be dealing with the actual problem and having our legislative committee or the mayor going to the governor telling him that the State Emergency Commission is allocating the funds incorrectly. But of course, I don't have that info. So, and I'm certainly not saying that they are. I don't know if they are or not. What I do know is we've got to figure out how to keep kids in school. And if that means that somebody needs to reach out to the school district to try to get some of this data so that we can help advocate for the school systems across the state. If we need to do that, I believe we should be doing that. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, are you feeling that this was given because the cities had the best idea of where to allocate the money and in a unique situation? Is there other cities that are getting this CARES funding that they're also giving to their school? I guess that would be the real question there.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. Mayor Wojciechowski, members of City Council and Council President Sandy, I think that's a really good, I suspect, cities and counties are first. We got some money. My guess is, because we're always like behind the curve on this pandemic, and then all of a sudden there were lots of school needs across the state, so suddenly they were the next in line with getting some of their needs met with behind the curve of us, but getting the needs met with them. So I think along the way, not knowing all of that information, what we really wanted to make sure of it, and got to be careful, we kind of reached out to them, what do you guys need to help reinforce so you can stay in school? So we asked the question, they gave the answer, and so I want to make sure as we leave tonight that we really reached out to them and said this is really a huge city priority, what do you need? So they gave us some of their priorities, and clearly we were only meeting a fraction of what their needs are. And if we get additional information within the next 2 weeks, we can come back here and say, good news, we don't need to allocate all this. We can reallocate it within our own nest, if you will.
Ms. Mock?
If the schools didn't need it, or if there were various priorities identified, it's not as if we couldn't put that towards the CDBG funds that Ms. Richards is going to speak to. There are various issues that are economic or workforce or related to housing that may have needs as well. So it's not as if those aren't priorities that then impact the schools as well. So I think we could, if they can prioritize at least the spending of the other grant dollars first, and then if we have the opportunity to reallocate it, there's always income-based allocations that some of those people that might need it as well.
Ms. Richards, should we go through her as part now then?
Good evening, Mayor. I don't have too much to add. Just a little background. As Mr. Phelan said, we did hear just over a week ago that we would be getting this $298,000 from the third round of CARES funding through HUD. Our first round, you may recall, was allocated in April, and we used those funds to kind of replace the community service grant funding that was in Fund 2163. So that means that our nonprofits have already had a bite at the CARES Fund apple. This third round was kind of unexpected. When we got the first round, our COVID rates were very low. That was one of the criteria that HUD looked at for this third round. So I guess that's one of the small bonuses of having high COVID rates, is we got an extra $300,000 from HUD. But that being said, there is still that duplication of benefits requirement associated with this money. So if the school district or any other subrecipient has been reimbursed for an expense, they can't basically be paid for it twice using CDBG funds. So that's kind of built into the funding. I did say to Mr. Phelan that it would be nice to get this out in large, impactful pieces quickly. As I said, the first round did go to, through kind of our competitive process with the area nonprofits that typically get CDBG operating funds. They, of course, have needs, but that HUD funding that was available through that first round is just getting out to them now. So they are just getting the ability to request reimbursement for those expenses that they requested funding for that round in the spring. So I guess the only other point to make is HUD provides these funds to the community for us to use in the way that we see fit, within the requirements, of course, of the program, but it doesn't have to be used for city expenses. They're kind of blind to the end recipient as long as that recipient meets the needs and the requirements, of the funding. And with this funding, it does need to be COVID related. So certainly happy to answer any questions.
So is this part of the action item? Is approving this all together in one motion?
We certainly have many ways to do this. If council is ready to say we want this money to go to the school district, for instance, we can begin that process with HUD. There's always a process, but it doesn't have to be tonight, but it certainly could be if you're ready.
Mayor Buchez, I would recommend we bring the CDBG portion to the next committee of the whole for further discussion, just because it's arrived. And all we're asking tonight is the current allocation of that dollar amounts to include that 221,000 and change to the Grand Forks Public Schools. We just wanted to highlight that there is additional monies. I think we bring that back next Monday. And at that point in time, even at that point, we'll have additional information about a potential allocation of the Grand Forks Public Schools. And I've even reached out to, sorry, I couldn't get a hold of Dr. Brenner. I have no concerns. I have few concerns that at the Grand Forks School District doesn't need the money, that Dr. Brenner and the school board's honorable people, they'll come back and say, you know what, our bank is full, we're robust, and they won't finally ask for the money. I have no concerns about that. Secondly, I did talk to Dr. Brenner. I asked him to be here tonight, but he had a meeting this evening. He couldn't be there, but he's willing to be here to give you an update, COVID-related update on the school district 2 weeks from today at the next city council meeting. So I think it'll sync real well. He can come back and provide a financial report on how things have gone and also an operational report. So he said he'd be willing to come to the next city council meeting 2 weeks from today.
All right, any other questions or comments? Although I think we got to be pretty clear on what the motion is exactly that we're making. So,
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Weber.
I like the idea of holding off on the CDBG portion. And very quickly, I'm sympathetic to the notion of getting those monies out quickly, but there is a process. That process requires input from low-income neighborhoods and those who serve those neighborhoods. And as Ms. Richards just pointed out, even with that last round, it always takes a while for the feds to actually allocate the money. So I don't know, while I'm sympathetic to wanting to get the money out fast, the reality is that the money doesn't always come in very quickly. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but we can discuss that next week at the Committee of the Whole. So the motion is not going to include the allocation of those CDBG funds tonight.
Mayor Buchez, we're just asking for the allocation of the existing CARES funds that we have received. And the rest we'll bring back to CDBG. Will come to the Committee of the Whole next week for further discussion, and then longer term, hopefully, we receive additional CARES funding. So what we're asking this evening is that we would approve the noted CARES Relief Fund allocation with an associated budget amendment. We make it subject to final approval of the city attorney to include a funding agreement with the Grand Forks Public Schools. I know Councilmember Weigel wanted to have that allocated. The portion that goes to the Grand Forks Public Schools, have that allocated in a similar way that they allocated their previous CARES funding in a per capita or per pupil manner. And the other thing that I added on is that we would be back here at the next city council meeting with a report regarding Grand Forks Public Schools. But I think the difference between Council Vice President and I on the motion, I'm taking more of a proactive that let's provide the money as more of a positive outlay. And then if they don't need it in the future, we can always bring it back to us. So I'm just doing it more in a positive way.
Are there any other questions, comments?
I'll make that motion.
All right, I have a motion from Council President Singh. Do we have a second?
Can I just ask that it at least be amended to include that the public schools will utilize their reimbursement allocation with the specific CARES Act funding that was allocated to them first before these funds?
Is that part of the original motion?
I think that's what I said.
Yeah. Okay, so that is part of the motion. So is that a second, Ms. Mock?
No, Dan second.
Okay, so a second from Mr. Weigel. Any other questions or comments?
That clarification from Ms. Mock has been accepted by both Mr. Sandy and Mr. Weigel. Very good.
Great, seeing no other questions or comments, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. 4.1 carries. All right, 4.7, Mr. Gangler.
And I'll just read that, Rick. That's the plat of Cowger re-subdivision, being a replat of Lot 1, Block 1, Auditors Subdivision Number 22, Lot B, Block 1 of the replat of Lot 27, Block 1, Boyd Second Edition.
Okay, if you bear with me, I'll find the right file here. Okay,
Mr. Gangler? Okay. My question is pretty simple. I don't know if you don't have to make it. How does the Williams Brothers pipeline impact the parking requirement that's being requested for this?
it will impact it, but it's part of the standard process that developers have to go through. They have to work very closely with the Magellan Pipeline folks. They will ultimately review and approve the construction specs for anything that's going to be on top of the easement, which paving they do allow, but it has to meet very specific criteria from the pipeline. So with projects like this, we won't be able to sign off on it until we know that it's been approved by the pipeline folks.
By them. So that's how the process goes. They'll have to work directly with them and then to bring that information back to the city before we would give them a permit to do the work.
Right.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions or comments on 4.7? Motion? Motion from Mr. Veen, second by Mr. Sandy. All those in favor? Well, any other questions or comments? None? All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. 4.7 carries. 4.9, did you have a similar question, Mr. Veen, a simple one, or do you want me to go through 4.9?
No, this one I want to go, Mr. Gangler, it's my thought that this is very similar to the issue that we had in the legislature last year, where there was some concern that the city didn't always work with property owners to resolve issues with some of these types of zoning. Is that right?
Yes, I would say that.
Because I want the public to know that we actually do address these things on an individual basis, and I don't think there's a need for additional state statutes to try to take this away, let's put it that way.
Yeah, this is one of a good handful over the years that we've done, and maybe just for the council's benefit, what we've got highlighted in yellow on your screen is a single-family lot and then an adjacent vacant lot. They're both owned by the same folks. There's a single-family home there. Well, for many, many years, it's been zoned B3 commercial, and a lot of times these non-conforming situations are able to basically stand the test of time as far as not having to remove the structure or cease using it as a residence. However, 9 times out of 10, when they go to their lenders or others that are dealing with some kind of financial transaction, whether it's refinancing or anything, a lot of times situations like this can arise where they may not be eligible or able to get that refinancing option or whatever the case is, because those that are processing the paperwork consider it and understand it to be non-conforming. So when we get these types of situations, as Mr. Bean was indicating, it is adjacent to an existing residential zoning, so therefore there's really nothing from a legal standpoint that would prevent us from doing that. So again, I agree with Mr. Bean that we, when able, we definitely try to work with these property owners to make their property whole for them.
So my only comment, I think it's a great way to get things done, and I agree with the Planning and Zoning Commission and the recommendation, so I would move approval of this one.
Sounds good. We have a second. Mr. Weber seconds. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. 4.9 carries. 4.11. Did you have something similar on that one, Mr. Green, or do you want Mr. Gangler to?
Well, I think
summarize it?
I have some questions on probably the description or the boundaries of this annexation, and maybe you just want to walk us through that.
The map that we're looking at right now was the original submittal from the applicant. This is the area that is east of South Washington, the newer area that's slowly expanding to 62nd Avenue. So the original proposal was basically a proposal based on approved future annexations. So according to the map, as you can see, what's in blue is currently not annexed, but it, Greta, can you change the monitor to the big screen? Okay, thank you. So as I said, what's in blue here is what the developer originally requested to annex, and then of course everything in orange would have a date certain annexation no later than January of 2023, and then the green would be the same thing except 2025, and then with the remainder of the area shown in white to be determined at a future time. Well, we know that over the years we've talked about how aggressive should we be with our annexations versus when is it appropriate to move forward, when it's not. There's so many different examples of different situations that we have. Case in point, North 81, all the businesses that are along North Washington or Highway 81 have never been annexed. There's been existing businesses there for many years. I remember when I first started with the city back in 98 or 99, there was a series of annexation studies that had come up previous. Like every 5 years there'd be an annexation study done, and it would basically get shelved, and then another one. We haven't had a real comprehensive annexation study for that area. So we have so many different examples of situations. We still have a few islands left, and by islands I mean areas that have been developed around. We've closed most of them. There's a few left. So staff basically had some negotiations with the owner. I wasn't really comfortable with the timed or the phasing of the annexation, because we're looking at smaller pieces where sometimes we've had developments in the past where we had much larger acreage that had been identified as future annexation. So after speaking with the developer, what now you see in blue is what staff came back as the suggested annexation area. And of course, the park area is already platted and annexed. School district does own property, but it's not currently annexed. Prairie Development owns pretty much the southerly portion, and then on the far left bottom corner is still a privately owned, I think there's a residence on there at 4.7 acres. So from a staff perspective, we thought what is highlighted in blue to be annexed upon approval of this particular annexation ordinance without regard to future timing. And then with the rest of the property, as the development continues to reach 62nd, then we would entertain those annexations. And I think one of the biggest reasons in speaking with Mr. Grasser, the significance of getting both sides of the southerly extension of Cherry is just to be able to nail that down and to be able to actually get it into the city limits and get it constructed, and or at least have it programmed so we can finish that part of our transportation system in the area, because as you know, we've had multiple discussions about developing further south of this on 62nd Avenue. So the roadway was critical, we thought, to again to get that solidified under an annexation. And the Planning and Zoning Commission did approve the staff recommendation. Now it's before you. Did I cover everything, or?
No, I appreciate the follow-up with the rationale for what you did. I have a couple of concerns, maybe. On 60th Avenue South, as an example, it would seem like we should have went the full 140 feet on the south side of 60th all the way across. Do you have a segment of David Drive or whatever that turns into there that it doesn't have area to the south of it for, say, for special assessment purposes or whatever you might do for the road? Because you usually go 100, we want that distance on both sides. So it would seem to me to make more sense if we would have carried that entire length, the 140 feet south, all the way from east to west there, if you know what I mean. That seems to make more sense to me. I mean, what you've done, I think, has gone a long ways from the recommendation. I would agree with you. Those future annexations just don't seem to, they seem to be more problematic than not, so doing it right the first time makes the most sense. So I guess my recommendation is we would add that additional 140 feet into the annexation. And that's my first question. The second one would be more maybe in the school property and that south. It seems like we created, this is almost, you know, you got a peninsula maybe there that's left out. It would seem to make the most sense again to have included that part all the way down to 62nd in the annexation also. Otherwise, that's just going to sit there. And I don't know when I'll ever get annexed. And it would seem, you know, we've talked about not having, closing up these annexations and expanding them. It would seem like I mean, I'd love to annex the whole thing, but I understand that that's probably a little bit much. But adding the 140 feet and then doing the area where the school is over toward Cottonwood Street would seem to make long-term sense for the city from our part. I'd like your comments on that.
I definitely would agree with the, including the 140 feet south of what would be 60th Avenue. Just by looking at the map, it's consistent with what we're doing on Cherry. I know Cherry primarily was we went with the 140 simply because of the classification of the roadway in terms of being a collector street. In terms of going further east, I think that's part of the bigger policy questions that we've been wrestling with in terms of how much and where's the appropriate place to take in more. I know it's going to be a part of our up-and-coming land use plan update. I know annexation was something that we really need to get our arms around so we can be much more consistent. If we are going to be aggressive, then it has to be applied, of course, across the board, unless there's circumstances that are just beyond, you know, beyond the realm of what we're dealing with. So in terms of staff, we definitely can live either way with it or without including it. But more importantly, just to note that this isn't a unique situation. It's something that we deal with almost on every annexation that we do to some degree.
Well, and my thinking, you're right, we've talked about this over and over again, but we're trying to be stronger with our annexations. At least that's what I've felt we've kind of given you directions for, and it seems like the real strong point I said would have been to take everything north of 62nd, but short of that, doing the additional 140 feet again and the area to the east seems to make sense with what we've said in the past as a city council.
I don't see anybody in the audience representing, Greta, is there anybody on Zoom that got the link to participate? Okay, I think she said no. But yeah, again, staff, we'll work with either option, with the underlying notion that we know we need to come to terms with our policies.
Mr. Sandy?
Mr. Gangler, the school district is not exempt from flood protection special assessments, correct?
I believe that's correct. Yeah, they don't pay property taxes, but I believe they do pay full specials.
Any idea what the number would be on a special assessment for 8 acres of property for the flood protection? Anyone?
Offhand, I wouldn't know.
I bet it's big.
Yeah, and you know, it's something I could follow up on, but I don't have that number in front of me.
I agree with what Mr. Veen's saying, and I like the concept of being a little more aggressive with our annexations. I also, we're talking about giving the school district money tonight, and then I feel like it's a little bit of bait and switch if then we turn around and annex them so that we can get them to pay our special assessments. So I like the concept of adding the 140 feet south 60th Avenue South, Mr. Gangler, but I probably would be okay with not bringing the school property, and in which case then the property south of 61st Avenue as well, just to keep it more simple, I think. Just my opinion.
Mr. Veen?
This is first reading, so it's coming back, right?
Right, first reading, then you'll introduce the ordinance, and then it'll come back.
So, I mean, we could modify it again on the last time it comes through.
Yes.
So if I could, I'd make the motion to add the 140 feet in on the south side, or to approve the annexation with the addition of the 140 feet. And if you would come back, it's an additional 5.1 acres, it looks like, of school. Is that right?
Yeah, additional that's not currently annexed, the easterly part of the lot.
So what we're talking about, if we do the whole thing, we're adding additional 5 acres.
Right.
And just let us know what those costs are, and we can think about it the next time.
Okay.
Are you looking at the 140 starting at Washington or starting where it
No,
dips down there?
it really starts at that line that goes between David and Luann.
Okay.
Right
Right,
there.
yeah, this area here that my hand is going across.
And then what are you looking for the east of that?
And then just, not asking for any more annexation today, but just find out what the cost is for the additional annexation, and we can make that decision on the next reading, if we want to add that in or not.
For both properties, the school as well as the privately owned?
Sure. Might as well know it all.
And if I could, Mayor Boczynski, President, any members of council. So I did get a message here that it's 13 cents a square foot on those flood specials. So we can figure a dollar amount once we know the square footage there.
We'll let Dana do the math real quick.
And just to keep in mind, these numbers that I'm showing here aren't the actual, surveyed numbers. They're just some math that we did on the GIS.
Just have a quick question. Was the developer present during the Planning and Zoning Commission where you guys went through the phasing and decided not to do that? I was just curious.
Yes, I do recall. I think somebody was in the audience.
Okay, cool. That's all.
Mayor Paczynski, maybe it would be, we all want to annex. The issue we have are our flood protection specials.
Yeah.
And the reason why other communities go ahead, because it's not that, but because this city chose to special assess property and flood protection, unlike our neighbors to our south, this becomes an issue every time we try to incrementally annex everything. And so I think sometimes we paint the people, they're unwilling to be annexed. They don't mind being annexed, but once they find out what that special assessment will be for the flood protection, it's a big deal. And as we've come across, and it's really one of the Achilles heel we really have. And maybe a larger discussion, Mayor Boczynski, if we could have, and this kind of goes back to our housing discussion, and we've done a variety of different things over the years to try to spur things. We've got maybe we could couple this discussion with housing related and annexations. Is there something we could do would promote annexation, but do some other things, and maybe that would help conversation, because we really have a case example of why people don't want to annex, because it is, that flood protection special is a tough one for everyone to swallow.
Yeah.
Ms. Mock, did you have?
Mayor, I think we have that same issue with the sanitary sewer on some of those areas where you had to pay the fee, right? And all of that may sometimes play into the whole issue of development, so.
All right, so do we have a motion, or how did you want to leave it for today?
Just 140 feet.
140 feet added?
Yep.
Across all the way till it connects, all right. So we have a motion with the added 140 feet there. Do we have a good clarification on exactly as you showed it? We have a second from Mr. Kwame. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries for 4.11. Number 5, informational items.
Mayor Boczynski, if we could also, just before we move on to information items, get a motion to introduce ordinances on 4.8, 4.9, 4.10, and 4.11.
We got a motion from Mr. Sandy. Second, Mr. Weigel. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Those motions carry as well.
All right,
Now we'll move to 5.
Thank you. 5.1, investment portfolio as of August 31st. And
All right. Citizen comments, did we have any online or any? I don't think we have anybody in the audience. No. 7, approval of minutes and bills.
7.1, vendor list as presented.
Do you have a motion? Mr. Sandy motions, Ms. Mock seconds. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries.
And 7.2 is minutes from July 20th.
Mr. Kwame motions. Do we have a second? Ms. Mock seconds. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And 7 minutes carry for approval. Number 8, Todd, do you have any other comments tonight, City
No,
Administrator?
I've said enough. Thank you, Mayor.
That is true. All right. Number 9, let's start, have any council members outside the president and vice president have any comments? Seeing none, we'll move to Council Vice President Mock.
I think I said enough, Jim.
Oh, Mr. Sandy? Good evening. Well, in the spirit of where this is going, I won't have any either. So we'll move on to 10. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Oh, Ms. Dockler motions and a second by Mr. Weigel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.